As a multi-award-winning violinist and educator, Mary Beth Woodruff's resume includes training at MIT, Carnegie Mellon, the New England Conservatory, and the Interlochen Arts Academy. As well as her work with Tundi Productions, Mary Beth is also the concertmaster for Santa Maria Philharmonic in Central California, a member of the Radian String Quartet, and the artistic director and conductor of Santa Barbara Strings. Thank you so much for meeting with me today.
Absolutely. My pleasure, Wendy.
So, you've been a part of the Wagner in Vermont Festival since its launch with Tristan and Isolde in 2019, and you're returning for another year as concertmaster of the festival orchestra. First of all, for those uninitiated into the world of orchestral playing, what exactly is the role and the purpose of the concertmaster?
So the concertmaster is, I mean, some people refer to it as first violin, but that's a bit erroneous because every symphony orchestra has a section of first violinists and a section of second violinists. It's amazing how many even professional musicians that aren't symphony orchestra players are even unaware of that. So yeah, not necessarily correct to call it the first violinist, but the concertmaster is the person who is the sitting in the head chair of that first violin section, and is sort of the second mate to the conductor, both based on proximity, because I'm right underneath, in this case Hugh, and also in the part writing. The first violin parts, in much of the orchestral repertoire, I compare it to doing neurosurgery on a tightrope. That's what much of it feels like, tightrope being quite literally the E string of the violin, that much of our playing is very high up there. So really intonationally challenging. But that's where much of the writing needs to be for the line to be heard in the range, where some of the obviously highest range in the whole orchestra. So it's a bit treacherous, and if we don't start out as type A people, we end up there in some way, shape, or form. It's always funny with instrumentalists to see the difference between violinist, violist, cellist, double bass, and certainly those other characters that blow on their instrument. I mean, it's almost like a different world. So, and that's I'll talk about that a little later, in that's something we've tried to talk about with Hugh and Jenna and this company, is how to breach that gap, not only between the instrumentalists and the singers, but the strings and the woodwinds, the strings and the brass, like how to combine that. These are a bit, speaking of the sort of tribal warfare in the ring, those are kind of tribes that we have to integrate and know how to deal with. Fascinating tribes, and thank God for human differences, because I think Wagner exploits them all and celebrates them all. So back to concertmaster. Um, in the actual act of performing, it's my job, if Hugh is, if the conductor, I'll try to keep it anonymous, is in the case of opera, having to be intimately involved with the singers, or a singer jumps something, and this is an unbelievable amount of memorized material that you all are responsible for. We do not memorize our parts, which is, in the case of Valkyrie, 65 pages of torturous music. There would be, has anybody ever memorized orchestral parts too? No, I mean, it's kind of an impossible thing, but high respect to not only the language skills of the singers and the vocal skills, but the memorization skills. That's not something that is on our plate, that I will say right away. So sometimes there will be, somebody that will jump the gun a little or be behind, and we will actually have to move. And this is where a masterful conductor comes into play, and that he catches way before the rest of us. That's not always the case with conductors. Sometimes I'm sitting there as concertmaster going, oh God, and have to try to get us together. Or it could be, that somebody in the orchestra is coming in at a wrong place. There's a vast amount of material. Does that sort of stuff happen in the Met or in Bayreuth? Probably not so much as in a company that's putting together stuff in 2 weeks that is freshly approaching the opera, which to me is a fragile and absolutely beautiful thing. That this is something that, maybe in worst case scenarios like bullfighting, you don't know what's going to happen, that there's excitement to that, in how organic and how in the oven this thing is right in front of the audience. This is not some pre-prepared, we've done this 250 times, you're going to hear the same, you know, Walküre you heard last week, that you heard 10 years ago, 20 years ago. This is as fresh as it comes. So it's a bit, being concertmaster, in short answer, in this case, is Mr. Toad's wild ride at best. I love Wind in the Willows. At worst, it's this high wire tightrope act where you're just concentrating and working all the time. There's no sitting back. Obviously, Wagner opera, unbelievably physically taxing on the players. So with the violin and the viola in particular, we're holding the instrument on our body. Cello, much more friendly, much more user friendly. I think it's why many more adults take up the cello or the guitar or the piano. You get to sit down, and the gravity, you know, is holding your instrument, not your body. So that is incredible. I mean, the neck pain, the shoulder pain, all that sort of stuff. So keeping yourself relaxed, a big job. In this case, our fair conductor and you know, ringleader, I'm doing a lot of circus analogies, it's funny, has arranged fastidiously these parts for a select number of players. Is anything taken out of Wagner? No, that was very important to me from the beginning. Is this like a, you know, sort of Cliff Notes version of the rings that we're engaging in? Has he, there are a couple spots where, sorry, those are my kids in the background, where Hugh maybe tried to make something a little bit easier for the strings. And I said, oh God, don't do that. I want to play this. He's like, wow, you're a masochist. Well, yeah, why would I be going to Vermont for 2 weeks to play 2 Wagner operas and rehearse that heavily, not to mention be concertmaster? So he has arranged the parts such that it is spread between 8 violins. Often, in this case, this is not typical in the performance of the ring cycle. My material is solo material, so that makes it even harder. Sometimes doubled or tripled. Almost very rarely is there a whole section of 8 playing the same thing, which is, of course, in the actual opera, the way you would hear it. You'd have a whole section of first violinists, a whole section of second violinists. He's arranged this for chamber orchestra. So it makes it a chamber music type experience that we're all having to be soloists in a way. But there is massive counting that is going on because of that, much more so than if we were all just playing in a single section. Because I'm often entering completely on my own, with much like, you know, you are as a soprano. Soprano, or are you mezzo?
Mezzo, yeah.
Mezzo. Okay, sorry, this is a big deal. I'm not a violist, I'm a violinist. So we're often, you know, and if you're sitting 8th chair first violin and you're supposed to enter all by yourself, that's not what that person is used to doing, sitting in the back of the section. They're used to depending on the concertmaster. So it creates an added level of difficulty to the situation, in that the parts are divided as such. Hopefully that answers
I guess
that question.
the analogy there would be somebody who's always been a choir singer, perhaps at the back of
Yes.
the section, then suddenly having to stand up and sing Brunhilde. And it's that, you know, you're coming in on your own out of nowhere for the first time. Yeah, it's
You're absolutely correct. And I think you can theoretically write these parts out on paper to cover everything in the score and be like, yeah, I'm giving the first stand of violins a break, and instead that last stand is playing it. That's asking a lot of those players who were way back in there in the pit, and in the parts, we did a lot of notating ourselves about when these passages were solo versus tutti, because it wasn't always known. Because again, this is a totally fresh, totally new approach to these operas, as far as I know. Has anybody done this? Well, they probably have, but to my knowledge, the way that Hugh has done it is individualized to this company, as I tend to think Wagner himself would have done if he were in Brattleboro, Vermont, in 2023. You work with what is there, and how best to convey and impact with the art based on what is there. That I am from from California adds another element, because of course the flying out there and finding a place to stay and all of that makes it more of an arduous journey than if I were from New England. I have deep history in New England, love that area, so I don't feel like a complete outsider. Like I still feel like it is farm to table, and has organic integrity in that I'm from that area, and of course we're all in deeply indebted and in love with this music, and in that sense we're all of the same family.
Mm. Yeah, there's quite a number of people who are traveling across the US, obviously me from the
Yeah,
UK as well. So we've got quite a distance covered by all these
yeah,
people coming together to kind of enjoy the music. So yeah. So
that to me is something I hope that our audience members are aware of, and it's a huge thing that people come from as far as they do, and even that this interview is happening from Wendy in the UK and me in Solvang, California, central coast of California, with 7 hours difference in time zone. It speaks to the discipline involved in keeping these connections together, and Wendy is huge and the glue of that, with all the social media that's going on, which I have to say, as much as I hate social media, is just masterfully done here and used for the purpose of trying to convey what we're doing and make sure that the appropriate audience knows about what's happening up there in Brattleboro.
yeah, and it's a way to share what we love. So that's I always see it as that we can do it in the festival, but we can keep doing it all year round, and that's what keeps us connected. So yeah,
Yep,
absolutely.
it's been wonderful. Yeah.
So now I've heard that you have a particular passion for Tristan and Isolde, and I believe it's what actually got you interested in opera in the first place. So how do you find the music of the Ring cycle, these three ring operas that we've looked at so far, kind of compares with that of Tristan?
I'll briefly touch on that without, derailing the whole interview and talking about Tristan the whole time, which I could easily do. Um, I had left the New England Conservatory of Music for a variety of reasons and tried to get as far away from music as I could by going to a little place across the river called MIT. Very, very hardcore. And I wanted to know, what is the hardest major here? What is the major that I will get the most bang for my buck in terms of, not future employment, but broad scale education in the sciences? And that was chemistry for me. And yet I ended up my senior year taking so many music classes as well, that John Harbison, the Pulitzer Prize winning composer who was my mentor there, said, "Mary Beth, do you realize you're only one class short of a double degree in music? You might want to just take that class." And part of me was like, well, that's not pure. Why would I take a class just to take a class and get a degree? But then I did so. So I mentioned that name, John Harbison. I took a class by him called From Schubert to Mahler, and in that class was Tristan. Um, and while not calling myself an opera hater, because hopefully by the time I was in college, not using the word hate anymore, just unintelligent and ridiculous and divisive, as we all know, but I was not a lover of opera. I was playing Bach cantatas in Boston with the Manual Music of Boston with Craig Smith and Lorraine Hunt Lieberson. Fell in love, I think, with the human voice through her voice itself. And she used to be a violist, so maybe that was the connection, that I could just hear all of sound, all of music in that voice. It wasn't voice versus viola versus the violin, which it kind of been for me. At that point, it was like, no, I have something in between me and my singing voice that's called a violin. On best case scenario, that instrument is out of the way and my singing voice is coming through. So I was surrounded by these incredible vocalists, but it was Bach. The Bach cantatas I'm deeply in love with, but total opposite end of the spectrum of Wagner. And so we're in this class from Schubert to Mahler, and are made to listen to the prelude to Tristan, and then Act Two of Tristan. And I was sitting in the MIT Music Library, which is like a concrete block of a place. There's nothing passionate about it, and just dissolved, just completely wrecked by what I was hearing, like opened wide up to the universe, the whole thing, the whole 9 yards. And I had been told by everybody, oh, you need to hear Mozart opera. Well, I heard magic flute in Salzburg and all this stuff. That didn't do it for me. And well, you need to hear Puccini and you need to hear Tosca and all this stuff. That didn't do it for me. And I'd played many of these operas as well at this point, didn't do it for me. Did Don Giovanni with Emmanuel in Jordan Hall. That was starting to do it for me. But nothing like this where I could, there was no separation anymore between, voice and having a set libretto that is sometimes ridiculous and full of drama. And to me I didn't see it as a pure art form, because there were words often. I mean, just ridiculous. I was very much an absolutist, and it was just all melded into one. When I heard Tristan, I was like, oh gosh, this is my deficit at this point. No more excuses. I now see what this is all about. But the good news is once that switch goes on with some people, and definitely with me, it didn't go off, and it just further deepened. So when I heard that this was being done in Vermont and was asked to play, I moved mountains to make it happen. And all three of my children came out with me. They were aged 13, 11, and 8 at the time. And it was just me with them. So to be playing these operas and these rehearsals, no childcare, trying to manage this. My 13-year-old was in the cello section, Aiden. So this was his first opera he ever played, was Tristan.
Wow.
My daughter, who was 8, was in the audience for most of it, and on the final performance had an unbelievably spiritual dream about Jenna. She sort of Jenna became huge to my daughter, as did Isolde, but they were not separated, I think. And she had this incredible dream about it. She was singing Tristan for months afterwards, and of course through the pandemic. And I'm still, and these are not friendly things to sing for a kid. This is not, row, row, row your boat. So she's singing this. It ended up in Tristan that in one of the acts, there's this big moment that involves triangles and cymbals. And Hugh did not have a percussionist, and asked the orchestra, I think it was 2 days before the performance, does anybody know a percussionist or have one lying around that we could use? In his inimitable, casual, but unbelievably funnily stated way. And I said, and nobody raises their hand, and we're all going, oh crap, because this is important. You need these two. And I said, Hugh, they happen to be 8 and 11 years old, but they're wicked RCM trained pianists and string players. They could totally count and do this as long as you, boom, give them the cue. They've played tons of chamber music at the young age. Love it. Let's do it. So this happened, and they were standing backstage, stage left, and hysterical. So Henry was he's now violist, was 11, and was the cymbal crash, and Claire was the triangle at this pivotal moment, which really is rather lackluster. It's like, I don't know, some fancy German dark chocolate cake without the frosting. You just can't have that. So it needed it at that moment. And Henry was so small, and the cymbal was so big, that when this happened, and he has these big blonde curls, boom, the curls just went everywhere. The hair went everywhere. So the whole orchestra is like cracking up whenever this happened. Well, all 2 times, 2 performances of it. So that was Tristan. And I had not had interest in the ring cycle. I pretty much was a Tristan purist at this point, that this is my work. And then kind of same thing with Mozart, that it was Don Giovanni that was the piece that I wanted to study, and thankfully then perform many times. But at that point, I was willing to go there with this company and with these players, with this concert hall, with these singers, with this community of Brattleboro, with nature and Vermont. My gosh, I mean, that's not a tough sell. So beautiful there, just the whole deal. And that Vermont in summer reminded me so much of Germany and Austria and the Black Forest and all that kind of stuff. That was an easy sell for my cosmic consciousness, that it was a transportation that was happening, a transportation of my soul, definitely as a player, that I thought I need to delve into these works. And the initial delving in was, oh my gosh, this is the most ridiculous thing ever on a superficial level. We've got trolls, we've got Valkyries, we've got sister brother falling in love. This is like, the Young and the Restless or something going on a superficial level. And that's where the music comes in so heavily. That sounds ridiculously simplistic to say, but I mean it. That does the libretto stand, and one of the big concepts I hope to bring up, the 3 or 4 biggies with Wagner, for people who maybe are not into Wagner yet. One of the biggies is this idea of Gesamtkunstwerk, which is total artwork. That he was writing the libretto, he was designing the sets, he was choosing every singer, he was micromanaging on an unbelievably positive level. Hugh definitely does that, and it's not at all annoying. I will often ask him for more directive. When you have somebody that brilliant and of such a knowledge base, it's fun for me, because I'm often in a leadership position to not be in a leadership position. I've told that to you, to be able to trust somebody in that position. But this Gesamtkunstwerk thing, all the elements are in many ways dependent on the other elements in that concept. And this libretto, in fact, if you took it by itself, could it serve as a novel or philosophical book on its own? I don't think so yet. Maybe he would argue that, but when you put it with the music and the harmonies and the sets and everything else that's going on, it absolutely works. Beyond works. It is so far from the realm of being ultimately ridiculous. Are there moments that are ridiculous? Sure. And Hugh did very funny things in the last translation of the text, that the super text that the audience was seeing, that unfortunately we don't get to see, but we're just brilliant. So it's got everything there, and there was no question that I was going to dive in completely. I put myself in a position where I did not expect that I was going to fall in love with it. I knew that I would be deeply in like with it, and I will say that it went beyond the in like phase, without a doubt, and intellectually and analytically, fully sold on the cycle and the music and how complete it is, and how there is no fluff. Like, could you take a couple hours out of the Ring and it would still be the Ring? No, I mean, it's unbelievably efficient for what it is. And you could be like, how is something that's 4 hours efficient? The beginning of Das Rheingold, and that was the first falling in love, I have to say, of the Ring. With the opening of Das Rheingold is in E flat, which happens to be my favorite key, and I'm a kook with the perfect pitch thing, that I really love certain keys over other keys. This goes on for 15 minutes, that the composer sticks on an E flat major triad. First of all, yeah, it's my favorite key, so give me more of what I want more of. My favorite key for 140 bars and 15 minutes on an E flat major triad. That right there shows the idea of the suspension of time in Wagner. So there's Gesamtkunstwerk, and there's all these things fitting together, but then the suspension of time and the idea of unending melodies and evasion of cadences. Cadences for non-musician are sentence closers, and crucial in the structure of Baroque and classical music. And Wagner just blew this, literally, that the river is flowing over, well, the analogy works for Rheingold, the river is flowing over the brim, very deeply with Wagner, in that, yeah, right there at the very beginning, he's showing you, yeah, I'm going to take 15 minutes on the same chord and you're going to love it. And I did love it. The shimmering quality that was there, the fact that it really felt like this unbelievably eternal river. It didn't just feel like a stream. Bach translates into little stream, the name of Bach. And I think of water a lot with Bach. This sort of river, this is the river of Siddhartha or something. I mean, it's Hesse, it's Nietzsche, it's just enormous, the scope of the writing, and that then sets the other idea with this absence of sentence structure, that he's purposefully evading and avoiding and keeping things going, it's like a work of art in which there's no perspective if you're looking at a piece of visual art on the wall. And it takes all the objects and they're just sort of floating in space, which therefore you can do anything at that point. You can focus on Psyche, you can focus on a nose if you're Picasso, you can focus on anything. And he does, and uses the third big concept of leitmotif to be this idea of taking a little seed of something and constantly referring back to that seed, and then referring to the seed in full bloom form in some cases, like two of Tristan, the whole full blooming, leitmotif taking over. It's fascinating to see in the Ring his love of Beethoven. So I was known as a big classicist, and Mozart, Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, and to see his obsession with late Beethoven, which before I was into Wagner, very obsessed with late Beethoven, going where does music go after this? It doesn't go anywhere. I would argue that Beethoven is perhaps sorry, Wagner in many ways is the heir apparent to late Beethoven, not to all of what Beethoven did to music, but in this sense, he was obsessed with Opus 31, string quartet, 6 late quartets of Beethoven's. Opus 31 being one of 7 movements that are without stop between them. Talk about lack of sentence structure. There's lack of paragraph and chapter structure there when you're doing that. So Beethoven was not only fooling around with that in a state of pure deafness and theoretical compositional thinking going on to the nth degree, but I think that was huge for Wagner in his conception of these works, knowing that sentence structure did not need to be there, and could be exploited and suspended to get more deeply into the psychology of these characters and spirituality than perhaps any opera before him. Sort of a long answer, but yeah, I'm very deeply in at this point, and we have just received the music a couple weeks ago. I mean, one could play off of the actual parts and still be studying them, but Hugh's parts are of course different in some ways. And doing a lot of listening. This is hard with 3 kids and a chamber orchestra, string orchestra program, and 30 students and everything that I have. So my summer in advance, thank God this is late August when this happens, because finally in summer I have a little space. I will be at Interlochen Center for the Arts teaching for 3 weeks away from home, and I will be teaching during the day, and then in the evenings listening fully with score in front of me and working these nasty passages to get them where they need to be.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating what you're saying about time. A lot of people, when they experience their first opera as an audience member, when they experience their first Wagner opera, there's always this thing of like, oh, it's 5 hours long, or you're
Yeah.
starting at 4 and finishing at 10:30 in terms of Valkyrie or Siegfried. But actually, a lot of people come out of it and they don't know where the time went. They can't believe it's finished. And
Yes.
I genuinely believe it's that master manipulation of how long all of these key changes take, and the fact there's no cadence, there's no end, that actually you're led on that
Yeah.
path as an audience member. You started to touch on there, the preparation that you're going to do and when you're going to start that. We talked to the singers about how long it takes to prepare those roles. They are generally working on them for several years. As you said, it's a lot to memorize in advance, and you do have the benefit of somebody else memorizing the conversation they're saying to you at the same time. But it's not normal for an orchestral player, and especially a pit player, to memorize these kinds of things. But there is a certain amount of preparation you have to do beforehand. You've mentioned listening to the score, and you've mentioned kind of working through those tricky passages. About how much time do you think that would take? How many months in advance would you prefer to prepare it? Or what else does it involve?
The preparation is huge. And it's sometimes frustrating. I'm sure singers have the same thing, but that I will spend, even last year doing Das Rheingold and Valkyrie, every night when I was done with those rehearsals, and I think we usually had 6 hours of rehearsals a day, sometimes a little bit more. I was practicing another 3 hours in the evening.
Right.
Anything that I missed, any passage that wasn't as clean as it needed to be, because you don't know exactly what the tempi are going to be. You don't know exactly what the problems are going to be with the orchestra. So on site, that's what was happening. So I was doing, 10 to 12 hours of playing a day. The physical shape that one has to be in is huge. And I think obviously the singers, one gets that because you're on the stage, you're standing, you're walking around for this amount of time. But we don't, especially as string players, we don't stop playing the entire time. So this is 4 hours of this. I mean, if you try to do that even for 5 minutes as a human, very, very hard. But it's 5 hours, and it's extreme. Just that the mental sort of torture at worst that you go through focusing on something that long for 4 hours without stop. I mean, you have to take it out of the realm of torture. You need to figure out how to find the freedom in there and not be constricted by the fact that you're in this small pit, you're with these players, you're with a small light, you're with a conductor who, my gosh, if people could see how much sweat is coming off of Hugh Keelan, that physicality is something to watch. We're experiencing it as well. There's times when the instrument is coming off my chin because there's so much perspiration. It's a physically taxing thing. The preparation of the parts, this is where a screen share is appropriate, that I can show one of these parts to give an example of what's happening here. I'm just going to do the full desktop. Okay, so sorry, there's multiple ones here. Here's a part, for example. Is that clear, Wendy? Can you see
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. So you see it has an X on the side. That shows you that, oh my God, this is off the chart difficult. Please look at this. Anytime I write an X on it. You can see in this part, the rhythms are absolutely treacherous. The range is absolutely treacherous for anybody can you see that cursor? Is that showing up right now?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So these notes are way above what is called the staff. We're often way up there. The Wagner is known for chromaticism. That you see these sharps and these flats here. That is what chromaticism is. Are we in any one key here? No, we're switching all over the place. Are we in any one meter? He's in 4/4, then he's in 2/4, then he's in 4/4 again, then he's in 2/4, 4/4. And this is all happening just lightning fast in the part. You will see these vertical lines where we as musicians write the big beats. This is beat 1, that's beat 2, that's beat 3. is there a beat 4 in this measure that Mary Beth wrote? Well, here's beat 4. Yeah. So we often will write that so that you know precisely where you are with the patterns of the conductor. There are fingerings in the part. I mean, if you look at the number of indicators I had to write in this part, arrows up, well, that's because I was tending to play that flat. This little thing that's a half step from that A flat to that G. This is a whole step right there. All those indicators in there. You know, there are probably 25 markings I've made on a single page there. That page goes by in about 15 seconds, I would say. And to learn that page, couple hours, I would say, and then repeat practice to get it in muscle memory. So it's huge, the preparation, and I couldn't quantify the hours. It will be, I would say, around 100 that I will spend at least on each of the operas before it happens. While we're here in the examples, I wanted to show some other stuff. What has Hugh done in this opera that is different than what you will hear at the Met? Well, here's an example. This is Valkyrie material, where we're playing arpeggios. So you see the notes are skipping. They're not going by scale, they're skipping. And you'll see that we have a grouping on the first beat here. Player number 1, player number 2 has a grouping on the second beat. That's to relieve us, so that in the original score, we would be playing this figure on all 3 beats, all players. Just over and over again, page upon page, and Hugh split it. So I'm playing on beat 1, my stand partner is playing on beat 2, another section's playing on beat 3. That's an example of what's done here. I had a conversation with Hugh. Here's musical nuts and bolts, because I found it, yet I'm a bit of a masochist, hard to only play one beat and then have to wait till the next measure. I wanted to play it all. And he's like, no, that may be best for Mary Beth, but not best for the whole section, something. So those are the types of choices that needed to be made. So done with that example. This is Act 3 to just show you how notey. Here he lets us play 2 of the groupings, but he takes the third one off. So it's more. This goes on and on for page upon page. Exhausting. And that's just one page out of 65. Yet these ones are relatively, these arpeggios are sort of the same. So that's beautiful. But then he mixes something up. He goes up a third here. I had to write A here because things are so small. You're reading that at Mach 1. I can't tell that that's an A. And this was an F sharp, but totally different. So that's what one of our parts looks like. This one, why did I show this one? To show one of these hallmarks of Wagner. There's Gesamtkunstwerk, there's unending melodies, deceptive cadences, there's with this overall suspension of time. There's chromaticism. This is showing chromaticism. This is moving by half step. This means every white and black key on the piano would be played here. Although then, being typical Wagner, here's where it gets nasty. This one is not a half step. It's a whole step. So this just drives you nuts as a player trying to do. Was Wagner a string player? Absolutely not. So that gave him, freedom to not be constricted by what the instrument can do. But that then constricted us by him sometimes asking things that the instrument can't do. So it's a double-edged sword. Swords are good in Wagner. So it's all over the map. This shows the chromaticism. Here's an example where Hugh decided we're going to make this a Mary Beth solo, and I don't believe that one is in the original. So in going through this vast amount of material, one of my first things will be to find all those passages so that I'm, in the first rehearsal, not falling on my face, and I'm nailing these solos. What is very hard is you'll notice in here, there's so many notes, and then I'll take the share screen off. There's so many notes that there's little space for any writing into our music, any of the libretto. Do I know who's singing at any given time? Do I know what's happening in the music? The music is so huge, there's no space for that. So that's something that is hard for me, because there's so much material. So for me to know at all times where I am, I don't know what's happening in the plot, and that bugs me. So I don't have a deep enough knowledge yet that I can hear this phrase, like you, probably Jenna, probably you as well, and know exactly what's happening in the plot at that moment. I can at this point play it cleanly and in tune, and that That's 3/4 of the battle. But I want to know it on a level where I have played it, 10, 20, 30 times, that I can say, yeah, Sieglinde is professing her love for her brother here, and this is happening, and he just used this word that is monumental, and that's why I'm playing these notes here. My favorite moments are in rehearsal, where he will explain that stuff. I took from so we and Valkyrie are playing on different parts than we did the first time. I'll do whatever Hugh tells me to do, because he pretty much 100% of the time knows what he's talking about, and I will just do it even if I don't believe in it. And in this case, he said, please play off these new parts, not your old ones. I have to transfer every single fingering, every indicator from the old part to the new part, so I have to figure out how to do that. That will take a number of hours. But in looking at that old part, I looked at a bunch of the funny things that I had written in the rehearsals. Act 1, Scene 1 of Valkyrie, Hugh, his descriptions are just hysterical, and one of the reasons I keep coming back, because they're just, it's a riot. He called Act 1 of Scene 1 couples therapy. Just hysterical. Scene 2, he said, this is a bully comfortable with his bullying, classic toxic masculinity. Just hysterical, and he's not wrong. Act 2, the erotic world of Siegfried, the problem act, he called it, which I just thought was so funny. Not the problem child, but the problem act, and in the weeds. So those are some of the things that I will write in the part that I do have when I get there. I'll recognize it, because otherwise it in some cases it is a bunch of notes, and it's going by so quickly, so treacherous, that I'm not able to have the enjoyment if I were on the outside of it. So I'm looking for that more and more. So, like, how can I remove myself from the notes? How can I get above the notes? And maybe anybody who's played Wagner their whole life will say, oh my God, it's impossible. You're doing great. Don't worry about it. But right now I'm trying to get to that phase where I can actually, drop the needle at different parts in Siegfried and know right where I am just listening to it. I can't do that at present. There's so much going on.
Yeah,
Anyway.
it's great to have that. It's like something you really have to work for, something you really have to work towards. It's the same, I would say it's the same for the singers. Like, you can learn all of the notes to sing one of these roles, but to
Yeah.
actually really get to grips and really truly understand the role, it's years work. So it's definitely comparable. The difference, of course, for the singers preparing is you can only sing for so many hours a day, and then your instrument says no, because you've got to sing again tomorrow. So in
Correct.
terms of the hours that are put in, you say like you're playing for 12 hours a day, voices just can't do that. So it's a different, the preparation starts more months ahead in order to do the same amount of hours, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and we are not supposed to play that much as string players either. We're technically not even supposed to play the length of a Wagner opera. And not to mention, in this case, Hugh has written, for the concertmaster, more than would in fact be in the original. So we're not supposed to play more than, 3 or 4 hours a day total. Tendonitis sets in, all sorts of neck issues, all this kind of stuff. So it's a very real thing to get yourself throughout the year in the physical shape. For you guys, for the voice, for me, the hands. If I'm not, so when I say preparation, of course, I'm gonna, in the next the 2 months is the main time that I'm preparing all the notes. But prior to that, I need to be in the physical shape, much like a marathon, that I can play for 4 or 5 hours. So that means if I'm missing weeks at a time of playing that much on my instrument, I'm up a creek come August. So it, in that sense, is a grand scale glacial preparation. Glacial, yeah, that's a good word for what
Yeah.
I think we all are engaged in. And on that note, we all know the glaciers are disappearing. I think that is approached in Wagner, the scale of what's happening, the necessity of the human consciousness being able to go deeply into something for 4 or 5 hours is why I would, you know, desperately tell people they need to go see these operas and study them, because we need to be able to understand things on a global level to know why we want the glaciers to still be there, not just that, yeah, the runoff produces a great stream in my backyard. That sort of thinking is abolished in sitting through a 4-hour Wagner opera. You're forced yourself to address many bigger scale more important issues in your own life than I think you would if you were watching a 30-minute sitcom. Nothing against those, but if that becomes all that we are engaged in, I think we're a bit in trouble. And Wagner, in many ways, is maybe not a one-stop shop, but certainly an unbelievably potent dose in collectively solving, I think, much of what is happening planet wise.
So it's challenging to play these pieces for the amount of time that you do, and just the physicality of having to play them and things like that. We talked a little bit when I was talking with Alan about how the stage is set up, and that this is a little bit different. The Latches Theatre doesn't have an orchestra pit. It's certainly, even if we move things around, it wouldn't have a pit big enough for what we need. So the orchestra is on stage with the singers, behind the singers, and then there's the screen in between. Does that pose different challenges as an orchestra player?
It does. We're very, very squished. So we're having to gently and kindly in our own little ecosystem find that space that your bow is not whacking somebody in the eyeball. And we're very close to the winds and brass. And Wagner's writing is heavy in winds and brass, as we all know. So we're fighting that balance problem to make sure that the strings are coming out, because they're about a fourth of us as there should be. And that is one of the bigger issues we deal with in rehearsal. Sonically, I'm having to wear earplugs sometimes because they're so close to us, so there's no ability to have the space and the protection between those instruments. I love them, but to have them that close to you, very, very hard. And to be able to hear yourself, we can't compete. So those are the negatives that we deal with. And I think he was constantly tweaking them to try to make them better. I love in rehearsals when the singers turn around and sing to us and with us, because I don't get to see their facial expressions. I don't get to see Kalen doing his goofy stuff, and he's riotous to watch and beautiful to watch. I mean, Jenna's expressions in Tristan just unbelievable. So I love those moments in rehearsal, but we can't see any of it. That's a huge limitation to us. And the number of operas I've been able to watch sitting in an audience, I can count on one hand, unfortunately. So that's a very real thing for those of us sort of down in the worst case scenario trenches there. But best case scenario, I feel like it's my job to provide those wings for the singers, that they can truly elevate beyond the earthbound if we're doing our job correctly. And that symbiosis is one of the most beautiful I found as a musician, is how to bridge the human voice with what I'm doing on an instrument, and literally so dealing in opera, and very intimately so in this form of opera. If the latches were bigger, it would be, I'm sure there'd be different problems we deal with. There's always issues. It just, with every ecosystem, finding what is needed, finding how it can most thrive, where it is, when it is, who it is. And I feel like this company is the little engine that has done this, in my experience, the best it can be done. Emmanuel at Boston did the same thing, and grew something incredibly beautiful out of nothing, that remained intimate and pure, and still is. And it's my hope, and I don't see any reason that it won't be that way, that Tundi stays that way as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely experimentation going on in terms of the stage spacing, with the idea of bringing things forward, and there's stuff going on this time that maybe there might be a little bit more elbow room. I'm not going to promise, but you might not have to just elbow your way in and out anymore.
It would be amazing. It would be amazing. And of course, the when somebody gets sick in an opera company, it's a disaster. When you have COVID, it's a double disaster. And I was just in total amazement that we, you know, largely completely avoided that
Mhm.
last year. And just so grateful that we didn't, that we were safe, because everybody was individually so responsible.
Yeah, yeah, there's such a group feeling towards the whole process that actually everyone took on whatever responsibilities that were put in place, and we made it through. We actually last year we only had one case, and that actually happened not at um, Wagner in Vermont. It was somebody who'd gone home for another event and then phoned in
Yeah,
and just didn't end
it
up
was
coming back. So
incredible. It was
yeah,
incredible. Even, yeah, and even if I were to get, you know, a really bad cold during this or cut my finger or something, that's treacherous when you're only doing, you know, two per. So I got to be really protective when I'm out there. There are days when I don't answer, and psychologically as well, where I don't answer emails when I'm doing this, because it's so fragile. And I have to be dependable during that length of time. So my kids know that I'm not going to really be reachable for large portions of time, just to make sure that the focus is there, and that yeah, I'm not going to go to some big huge indoor area with tons of people and no ventilation, because we have to stay healthy in this 2 weeks span of time. But
yeah.
anybody's worried about that, we were 100% successful this past year, and audience members as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, besides Wagner and Tristan, you've mentioned Don Giovanni, you've mentioned a few other things, and your love of Bach and Beethoven. Do you have any other dream works, dream pieces that you really want to play at some point in your career?
Opera or other?
Anything, anything.
Anything. Um, that is a tricky question to answer. There are some things that are not often programmed. I mean, so again, I the composers Beethoven and Mahler drew me into Wagner because he's right in between. And you
Mhm.
know, what did Wagner take from Beethoven? What did Mahler take from Wagner? How is that continuum? It's fascinating to me to hear Wagner in Mahler and to hear Beethoven in Wagner. I would love to do Mahler. There are the series of composers that all died after their Ninth Symphony while composing their 10th symphony, including Beethoven and Schubert and Bruckner and Mahler. And there's more. It's a little scary. So Mahler did not want to start work on his 10th symphony because he's like, I'm going to kick the bucket. And he did. And it's absolutely beautiful. And it's not a complete work. I would love to do Mahler 10. Because I think it's as forward reaching as, you know, Beethoven was in the late quartets, and as Wagner certainly in the late part of his career, but his whole career was. Um, there are things I would love to see arranged for string orchestra. That's my realm. That's my ecosystem. That's what I conduct in Santa Barbara, California, with kids, really beautifully playing kids of all levels, and from 26 different areas of school. So that's sort of my playground, that there's much of this music that I would love to arrange for string orchestra. I love Pat Metheny, the jazz musician, Lyle Mays, and I would love to arrange some of that for string orchestra. So I love, and that's where I think Hugh and I speak the same language, because he, in fact, during the pandemic, he did arrange some Bach organ trio sonatas for string orchestra. They were masterfully done. Like, he was sitting around, didn't have, you know, enough to do, and I needed this help because we were meeting outside under a tent, which you can do in California, during the entire pandemic with masks on and spaced and everything else. So yeah, I love taking things from one realm and bringing them to another realm and seeing what opens up when you do that. Um, Parsifal. I'd love to do Parsifal. I don't know if that will ever happen with Tundi, but
Oh
that
yeah.
would sure be fun.
Yeah, that's one that I love too. So
Awesome.
let's
Yeah.
keep it in the suggestion box, shall we, for
Yes,
future time?
definitely.
Yeah. So if we jumped in the car with you for a road trip, what would be on the soundtrack? Would it be all classical stuff, or what else would it be? You mentioned jazz there, so.
I love that question. I'm a big lover of Billy Joel. The Turnstile album of Billy Joel, lesser known, the song "Summer," Highland Falls, would be in there. And then when I started thinking about this, I realized it's songwriting in general.
Mhm.
That I love great songwriting, and I think we've gone away from that a lot in the 21st century in pop music. So I tend to gravitate towards those great songwriters. On the opposite end of the spectrum of harmony is Radiohead. I love Radiohead. That's a weird thing, but I do. Joni Mitchell in terms
Mhm.
of songwriting and vocal capacity. My gosh, that may be how I really fell in love with voice. Was Joni Mitchell. Um, I have a weird fascination with numbers. I was born on January 27th, 127. It's the same birthday as Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. So I've had a deep love of Mozart my whole life, well before I knew we shared the same birthday. So there would be Mozart in there. I love the last piece he wrote, Ave Verum Corpus, for choir. Again, I think about that, and when I think about my favorite works, I'm very surprised how many of them are vocal as a violinist. Like I'm not thinking of violin concertos right now, which is a little strange. Um, I did a paper at MIT on Soviet Georgian polyphonic chant music. This is some of the most beautiful music I've ever heard. There's a group called the Rustavi Choir that is still doing the music in the tradition of this Eastern European. It was sort of like a polyphonic island, so they were doing things way beyond monophony and chant that was happening over in Italy way before they should have. And it's so beautiful. So
Wow.
yeah, I would encourage singers to go there to listen to Georgian chant music. It's incredible. Um, what else is in there? I think I mentioned Pat Metheny and Lyle Mays, jazz
Mm.
pianist. I absolutely love. When I first moved to Boston, I was at New England Conservatory, and I knew that Pat Metheny was from Boston. So, and that was back in the time when we had phone books, at least in the library at NEC. So I remember I went in the phone book and I looked up his name, as one does, and it was actually in there. And so I called his number from my landline in the room, and it was actually an answering machine playing Pat Metheny music, and it said, "Hey, this is Pat, give me a message." I was just blown away. So I love that. Gone are those days, but that was amazing. Um, what else would be in there? The Bach cantatas, of course. I
Mm.
absolutely love. Vaughan Williams, Fantasia on a Theme by Thomas Tallis, one of my favorite pieces ever. Solo string quartet plus antiphonal string orchestras. So that definitely is, my realm, my family, but I think it's one of the most incredible string works ever written is that piece. And again, timeless, that Thomas Tallis was a Renaissance composer, and Vaughan Williams, modern composer, taking things of yore and using it as the core of his own work.
Mm. Wow,
Yeah,
an
and
eclectic
then
mix.
but speaking back to Wagner, and for people who maybe don't know his music and are going, wow, am I really going to sit through a 4-hour opera? There's a wonderful album of overtures and preludes by the Berlin Philharmonic of Wagner's music. Um, so these are not, 4-hour works. This is Tristan Prelude is there, Overture to Rienzi, beautiful piece of music. So this shows you the music on its own, without the human voice. If that is a deterrent to you, if you can't imagine yourself sitting watching Valkyries all over the place, uh, which I hope that you can eventually. But if you need the music as a gateway, that album is incredible. And I listened to that with my 83-year-old mother driving across the country a few years ago, and is a wonderful way to be exposed to Wagner. And that album, yeah, I was very grateful to. I think it came out when I was in college, and everybody had I had just heard the Tristan Prelude, and I wanted more, yet I still wasn't up to sitting through a recording in a music library of 4 hours of the Ring Cycle, not seeing it, listening. So I got that, and it was actually a really, really good exposure to many operas, is to listen to the overtures and preludes.
Hmm. Hmm. Interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you to think back to Wagner in Vermont 2022. Was there a particular moment that really stood out for you that's just stuck in your mind as a memory of Wagner in Vermont 2022?
Um, I have to say, and I'm not saying this because a Valkyrie is on the screen with me. Um, I just, gosh, I'm getting the chills again. I just got the chills the first time in the rehearsal. I'm getting teary too when I heard all those Valkyries sing, and I didn't know any of them personally. I mean, I think I knew you by name because of the social media stuff. But when I heard those voices on the stage and how exquisite they all were, I mean, I knew that Jenna was just going to blow it out of the ballpark as Brunhilde, but I thought there might be some more, choral oriented voices that were really good, but this was the level of greatness when I heard them all up there. And I could not believe that this one person I heard was only singing, as soloist for maybe 12 seconds of the whole production because the voice
Yeah.
was so exquisite. So I was really blown away by that and not expecting it. I expected it would be good because Hugh doesn't ever do anything lesser, but I did not expect the greatness that I heard with those Valkyries at that moment. Um, the orchestra did beautifully. Many unexpected moments of beauty in the performances that I thought, oh my gosh, that horn or that clarinet, has bass clarinet or whatever it was, has never played so beautifully as they just did in the performance. So we have, so little airtime with some of these treacherous moments that when they gel as they have, for both summers with Tundi in these performances, that's been an unpredictable joy. But yeah, that Valkyrie moment, and thank God I get to experience it again this summer. It was something else. It was overpowering, in a good way, and just I felt both the crazies and the wildness and the beast within and beauty all released at one time.
Mhm.
That's Valkyrie singing.
Yeah,
I,
there's nothing like having 8 women on stage just giving everything, and
was
it's
all there. It was all there. And there was this giant smile on Hugh's face. And he's a serious guy when you're conducting under him. I mean, it's I don't know what imposing German English conductor from the 50s and 60s you can come up with, but that's Hugh conducting, very, very intense, and you don't often know if you're pleasing the maestro kind of thing, and yet when you do, it's the heavens, the clouds part and the sun comes out. It's wonderful, and yet we don't need that all the time. It's wonderful when it comes, but when those Valkyries were singing, the smile, he was actually giggly the first time, and that's not commonplace with Hugh Keelan. So yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's just not the same listening to it on the video as well. It is up on the YouTube channel, but
Yeah.
it's just not the same experience as being in that theater and actually being hit by the vibrations of it all. So
I mean,
it's
I think what Wendy just said, yes, people, it's just not the same. It's just not the same. And to travel somewhere, to hear work, and to commit to sitting for that many hours is an unbelievable journey at a very low price tag. That I just can't imagine not taking, quite frankly, if you're anywhere near that region and the beauty of the region itself as well. Um, so yeah, there's nothing like being there in person, and there are many people who are going to live their lives having never seen a complete opera live. And it is an art form amongst the highest of humankind, I think. And even if you've never been there, just check us on that. Do it and report back. Is what I would say.
absolutely. You've pretty much stolen my final question, which is what would be your number one reason why people should travel to Brattleboro, Vermont this August for the Wagner in Vermont Festival?
Yeah, I would say deep engagement is what we are all missing in life in some way, shape, or form, that you go to this yoga class or this Zen retreat to try to solve, or read this book. I'm not putting down any of those things, but I think that live opera, the text, the music, the stagecraft, the being in a theater as beautiful as the Latches, being in a geographical location as gorgeous as Vermont, is just as potent an antidote to all of the former, all of these things that plague us as they come. So I'm advocating, opera for healing, yes, and more. Opera for there's extreme ecstasy in Wagner that you don't find in much music to the degree that you do in Wagner anywhere. The yeah, the pure ecstasy of the sound that is created, and we need that. We need joy. We need ecstasy as well in this form, and that this company is doing something beautiful that we're all doing at such an enormous level of commitment. Um, that in and of itself, even if it were an underwater basket weaving convention, is massive. It's a massive undertaking being taken in a not massive place, with a not massive amount of people. That is is something that is sublime and precious, and I would argue it has the potential to be life altering for you if you come.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Thank you so much. This is wonderful.
Absolutely. My pleasure to see you, Wendy, and I'll see you in a month or so in Brattleboro.